Victor Hugo and I, we have one thing in common. We speak terrible English. I would have liked Ken Tuff to deliver my speech, but since I'm here, I have to do it myself. So anyway, I think hearing my poor accent is better than reading a translation while I speak, so you will have to suffer a bit. I'm sorry for that. By the way, I would like to say first that I am one of Lisa's pupils, because reading Victor Hugo has changed my life. It was many years ago, and I'll come to that later. But first, since my talk is titled Chasing Victor Hugo on a 20-foot sailboat, I'd like to introduce that boat. Here is the boat. It's a Muscadet. It's a small boat in plywood, very cheap. I bought it for £1,000, roughly. It was the day I bought this boat. And since then, I sailed a lot with her. And finally, I sold her because I couldn't keep the boat. But in between, this boat allowed me to have a better understanding of Victor Hugo's life and work. How come? It's what I'm going to try to explain now. Yeah. Is it better? Good. I guess you all recognize this image since Gérard Ordinet showed it this morning. It's drawings that Hugo made in 1866. It is the Eddystone Lighthouse off the coast of Devon, quite far from here. At that time, Hugo was working on The Man Who Laughs, and he was gathering some information from a book which title is The Delights of Great Britain and Ireland, a book written by James Beverer. And in the process, Hugo came across that plate in the book. And so you can see the model on the left and what became of this plate in Hugo's work. And for me, that image says everything, because we see here Hugo's imagination at work, left to right. It shows the process of distortion he uses between his models and his work. This is true in these drawings, and this is true in his writings. And this brings me to my subject. Hugo's description of the Channel Islands in his novels, Toil of the Sea, 93, The Man Who Laughs, is also subject to such a distortion. It's a transposition, a magnification, and this captivated me to the point I spent almost 50 years of my life studying this, and in order to compare real and fiction places across the islands. Is it clear until now? Yeah, good. A last word about the Eddystone Lighthouse. In his novels, 93, Hugo writes, in the 17th century, a lighthouse was a sort of plume of the land on the seashore. The architecture of a lighthouse tower was magnificent and extravagant. It was covered with balconies, baluster, lodges, alcove, weathercocks, nothing but masks, statues, foliage, volutes, reliefs, figures large and small, medallions with inscription, pax in bello, Gérard Audinet said that this morning. And by the way, this declaration of peace did not always disarm the ocean, unquote. This was a digression in the episode about the shipwreck of the Comprachicos. And Hugo took the opportunities to talk about the different architectural types of lighthouse, primitive, Baroque, modern, and the Eddystone lighthouse is obviously Baroque, especially in Hugo's drawing. Today, it's much less Baroque, as you can see. At this point, I have to say a few words about me. I'm not a scholar. I'm a journalist, and I wrote a few books. I've sailed around the Channel Islands quite a lot, as many of you did, I guess. First, I fell in love with Chausey. Some of you know, maybe, I don't know. Chausey, here it is. It's about roughly 40 miles from here. And then I started chasing Victor Hugo around the archipel de la Manche, first without knowing it, and then knowing it. I remember very well my first visit to Saint-Pierre-Port in French, even though it was some decades ago. We set off late afternoon from Granville on a sailing boat with no engine, no electrical devices. It was long ago and GPS had not been invented yet. The wind gradually picked up after we left Granville, and we spent the night tacking to get past the Minkies, les Minkies. Not very far. It was a nightmare because all the night we had wind and we didn't know where we were. The next morning, when we arrived in front of Saint-Pierre, it was sunny, it was bright, and the place looked like paradise to me, and it still is. I said to myself, well, this is where I like to live, here, as you haven't the chance to do. As I discovered many years ago, many years later, when reading the diary of his daughter Adèle, Victor Hugo had a similar shock to mine when he discovered Saint-Pierre after a restless night. It was a century earlier, in August 1852. Hugo had just left Belgium for London, then he took a steamer from Southampton to Jersey, his future place of exile. On the way, the boat stopped at Guernsey, and it was then that Hugo had his first vision of Saint-Pierre. According to Adèle, his daughter, Victor Hugo said, "My dream would be to live on Guernsey, in a room with a view overlooking the sea, so that I could see the ships passing before my eyes." This dream would not come true until 3 years later when Hugo was expelled from Jersey. As in my case, but I am afraid the parallel between Victor Hugo is limited to that and to my bad English, as you can hear. This discovery of the island took place after an eventful journey. The crossing of the channel on the steamer was met in bad weather, and also Hugo later claimed to have an excellent night. His son Charles later testified that in the morning he saw his father appear, quote, blue and green, suffering from a slight attack of seasickness. I could say he was coming from the west, I was coming from the east, and in Guernsey we met. but that would be a very, very big lie. Because at that time, my first stopover, at the time of my first stopover in Saint-Pierre, all I knew of Hugo, what the school gave pupils to read. I didn't even know that Hugo had lived in Guernsey for 15 years. In short, I knew nothing. 1 year before, I was sailing from l'Île de Bréa to Jersey, and we had no wind at all, and a very thick fog. And believe it or not, it took us 2 days to go from Bréa to Jersey. 2 days. Yeah, it must be a record. You can imagine my relief when finally I set foot in Saint-Hélier. Once again, I crossed the path of Hugo without knowing it. I was arriving in Jersey. He was leaving this island from where he had just been expelled. It was in October 55. As the steamer left the island, once again, Jar stole one of my lines. Hugo wrote in his notebooks these few and famous words of spite and resentment: Jersey, rock, then cloud, then shadow, then nothing. As for me, I could have said the opposite. Just then nothing, then fog, then cloud, then rock. And it was in 1974. Rocks. And one day, I read Toiler of the Sea. I don't remember how I came across Hugo's novel, but I think someone gave it to me, knowing my already all-consuming passion for the Channel Islands. Year after year, I sailed in the area. I fell in love with these islands that seemed familiar and strange to me at the same time. It was the very first novel by Victor Hugo that I had in my hands, teenage hands that hadn't yet held many books, but had already pulled on many halyards, ropes, and sheets. Adolescence is the age of concussion, and nothing shook me more than the discovery of José, of the Channel Islands, and those incredible rocky plateaus called Minkies, and Écréhou. Minkies and Écréhou are only known to intrepid sailors, local practices, and nautical charts. But the charts give only a rough outline that should be treated with caution, and I would say with suspicion. These two archipelagos suddenly became a reality for me when, around the middle of my 16th year, on my first trip in the area, I entered in one and the other. Minkies and Écréhou are nothing more than confettis of granite and rough grass scattered across the sea after a monstrous geological carnival. I was mesmerized, really, by those rocks. Was I the only one to feel the powerful spells of these rocks? Well, no, there was also Victor Hugo. As I realized from the very first lines of L'Archipel de la Manche, then Toiler of the Sea. This text, and then the novel, stunned me so much that I felt immediately at home in it, in the novel. Whoever walks along this coast goes through a series of mirages, writes Hugo. At every moment the rock tries to fool you. Where do illusions nestle? In the granite, nothing could be stranger. Giant nuns hurry along, bending over the horizon. The petrified falls of their wells are shaped like the flight of the wind. Kings with plutonian crowns meditate on massive thrones, being of some sort buried in the rock, raise their arms outwards. You can see the fingers of their open hands. All this is a shapeless coast. Come closer, there is nothing left. The stones have this kind of a fainting spells. So I had to make an inventory of those spells in order to distinguish between reality and fiction, and that's how it all began. Roche d'Ouvre, today. It's not difficult to follow in the footsteps of Hugo through the Channel Islands, since, as far as I know, he only set foot on 3 of them, Jersey, Guernsey, Sark. It's less easy to follow Hugo in the novelist, because beyond these 3 islands, his knowledge of the archipelagos was based on personal accounts, readings, and above all, his imagination. Let's begin with the Douvre, where, as you know, the Durand sinks in Toil of the Sea, and where Gilliatt fights the giant octopus, as we saw this morning. With a friend, we often sailed from Paimpol to Guernsey and back, a route which, about halfway along, skims the rock of Roche d'Ouvre Plateau. Each time, we had fun imagining Gilliatt battling against the element and a monstrous octopus to recover the Durand's engine. In doing so, we were disobeying Hugo, who warns the reader of Toiler of the Sea not to confuse the Douvre of the novel with the Roche d'Ouvre. It's difficult to confuse both, anyway. In Toiler of the Sea, Hugo writes, at about 5 leagues out in the open sea, to the south of Guernsey, opposite Plymouth Point, and between the Channel Islands and Saint-Malo, there is a group of rocks called the Douvre. The spot is dangerous. This term Douvre applies to rock and cliffs and is very common. There is, for example, near the Côte du Nord, a Douvre, on which a lighthouse is now being constructed on the left, a dangerous reef, but one which must not be confounded with the rocks referred above. Unquote. This warning was not intending to draw a line between reality and fiction, in case some exegete had the foolish idea to document the site of the Durand wreck. This disastrous place where monstrous species swarm and eat each other does not exist, cannot exist, since these appalling forms are meant not to be seen by the human eyes, writes Hugo. And yet we saw them. Well, almost. With Hugo, the line between reality and fiction is never very clear. Anyway, I shall continue to salute Gilliatt each time I pass off the Roche d'Ouvre Plateau, and I will also say hello to the poor boy when sailing up north the Petit Russell, Little Russell. I leave the island of Oumet Paradise on my port side, since it's there at the very end of Toiler of the Sea that Gilliatt commits suicide. Minkies, les Minkies. I did most of my sailing in the islands alone on a little boat, the one you've seen before. And I went to the Minkies several times. Last year, I stopped there with a friend who is a professional photographer, and Philippe Cabaret is his name, and he took these pictures. I was stunned when I saw this picture. This was a fairly faithful reproduction of an ink wash by Victor Hugo, which name is Évocation of an Island, Évocation d'une île. It's a drawing that is kept at the Berggruen Museum in Berlin. Let's have a look. This. Hugo never set foot on Les Minquiers, on the Minkies. It was 20 kilometers off Marine Terrace, his home in exile in Jersey. And yet, he has drawn one of the islets. My friend Philippe did not know Hugo's watch, and yet he reproduced it. Victor Hugo has been dead for almost a century and a half, and yet he was with us. Let's see. It's some kind of miracle. Victor Hugo would have had difficulty seeing the Minkies from his window of my terrace, but he had heard of them. Les Minquiers, or the Minkies, first appear briefly in Toilers of the Sea. Quote, "What are the Minquiers?" said the American. The man from Saint-Malo replied, "They are very bad stones." Unquote. En français, les Minquiers sont des cailloux très mauvais. He couldn't have been any shorter than that. Later, in 93, the plateau of reefs would become more precise. Quote, "The Minkies was more dangerous at that time than it is now. Several of the turrets of this marine fortress have been worn away by the constant action of the sea. The form of the reef changes, waves are swords. Each tide is like the stroke of a saw. At that time, to be stranded on the Minkies meant death. Well, things haven't changed a lot today. This is a bad place for sailing boat, but I can't think of a more beautiful sight on the planet with so few visitors. There are a number of reasons for this. Les Minquiers, citadel of the abyss, marine fortress, is nothing in the middle of nothing, especially at high tide. It is the sea that shows its teeth, or worse, hides them just under the water's surface. No one comes in the middle of this chaos of reefs without trembling a little. And then I nearly got shipwrecked there on 2 occasions. On my last visit, the boat was picked up by an unexpected vein of current and carried towards a rock that was just as unexpected because it was not on the map. But once you have finished your slalom around the rock's head with the treacherous assistance of incomplete documents that look and work like alchemy manuals, once the last dangers have been avoided and the anchor dropped, you find yourself in the middle of a marvelous but inhuman sight. There are reefs as far as the eye can see, and the solitude is overwhelming as the place is sparsely frequented even in the height of summer. You feel as if you are in the eye of a cyclone. Everything is calm, but you dread the moment you have to come out of it. Staying here is not easy enough because at tides there is nothing to protect the main anchorage close to Maîtressil. I'd really like to know what Hugo would have written about the monkeys if it had been there once. Écreou, on the other side of Jersey. Another dreadful and wonderful sight, another marine fortress, is the Écreou archipelago in the northeast of Jersey. Same kind of place, a lot of rocks and no permanent residents, except some lobsters, if you're lucky enough. The name of the Écreou appears only one in Hugo works. It is in Toiler of the Sea where Hugo writes, in these civilized regions, the wilder rocks are rarely desert places. Smugglers are met with at Agot, custom house man at Binic, Celts at Brea, oyster dredgers at Cancale, rabbit shooters at Sésambre, crab gatherers at Brécourt, trawlers at the Manquier, dredgers at the Écreou. Nevertheless, I think the famous king of the Aucrinier, you see, Hugo talks about in Toiler of the Sea, owes much to the Écreou. Aucrinier, Écreou are close names. And they have kings too. Le roi des Aucriniers. Who is that man? Hugo writes, only the most ignorant are unaware of the fact that the greatest danger of the coast of the Channel Islands is the king of the Aucrinier. No inhabitants of the sea is more frightening. Whoever has seen him is certain to be wrecked between one St. Michael and the other. He is little being a dwarf, and is deaf being a king. He knows the names of all those who have been drowned in the seas, and the spots where they lie. Unquote. Philippe Pinel, the first king of the Écreou, maybe you know him. When Hugo was in exile in the Channel Islands, there was a king in Les Écreaux, a smuggler, Philippe Pinel, lived in the Écreaux between 48 and 96, almost 50 years, almost alone, on those rocks. He proclaimed himself king of the island in 63, and Queen Victoria pretended to take him seriously, sending him gifts. He himself sent her gifts, such as these wicker baskets. Then, Alphonse le Gastelois, second king of the Écreau. Le Gastelois had been wrongly accused of a crime in Jersey and had come to take refuge on the islets. He's on Marmotière. He too eventually decided to proclaim himself king of the Écreau, but not to avail. He died in a retirement home in Jersey. I tried to meet him, but I didn't succeed. He was in a retirement home, he was very ill, and people won't let me see. And he died a few weeks after that. And I think I've been lucky not meeting him, since Hugo writes, whoever sees him is certain to be wrecked between one St. Michael and the other. So good. They do look a bit alike, no? This you recognize. Yeah. It's J'ai tout. Yeah, j'ai tout. On one hand, there are the islands born in Hugo's imagination, and on the other, the islands he really saw. Gétou was the first island Hugo had under his eyes from the lookout. But he hardly ever talks about it, except once in Toiler of the Sea, he writes, out at sea, a few sailing boats at anchor were fishing. The Kashmir was not yet off Southampton. She had set her mainsail and was between Herm and Gétou. That's the only occasion he writes about Gétou. By the time Hugo arrived in Guernsey, the island was unoccupied and was quarried for granite. There was a granite mine, we can say? Quarry, okay. The first private occupant between 1867 and 1877 was Montague Filden, a man who used the island as a warehouse for his smuggling activities, as it was later discovered. Then the island becomes the home of the writer Edward Montague Compton Mackenzie between 1923 and 1934. Compton Mackenzie, on the right on this picture, apparently very proud of his Scottish roots. And he wrote a part of his work on Gétou. He was working in a small hut on Gétou. Here is that, but it's not Compton Mackenzie. It has not been very easy to make this picture because Gétou is a private island, today the property of Sir Peter Ogden. So I wrote to Peter Ogden, asking permission to visit his island. And he said yes. I had a good reason to go there because at that time I was planning a book about the novelist who wrote on and about the Channel Islands. So I had to see the place where Compton Mackenzie worked. And Peter Ogden very kindly, he said to me, well, come and I'll send a boat to pick you. Okay. So I went to Herm. I was in the White House Hotel, very comfortably comfortable anyway, waiting for Sir Peter Ogden to send me a boat, and he did. And so one day I saw the boat coming, and they said, well, the island is for you as long as you wish, and just tell us when you want to go back to Herm. So I was really happy, because that's the only island I didn't know in the Channel Islands. And it was very comfortable at the White House, by the way. So I had this opportunity to visit the island and the writing hut. It has two windows opening to the north and to the south, not to the west, so you can see the sea from there. Peter Ogden has a theory on that. He thinks Compton Mackenzie didn't want to be disturbed by the view when working. As for myself, I think this disposition had another goal, to protect the writer from the overpowering gaze from Victor Hugo. In fact, stunningly, the writing hut is just right under the poet's windows, 3 kilometers away, but right opposite Hauteville House. So the two novelists were working face to face, not at the same time, however. You recognize this? No? It's just there. Le Havre-Gosselin, Cirque. It was at the beginning of the month, the weather was nice. For Victor Hugo, the most beautiful of the Channel Islands was Sark, Havre-Gosselin. Even before he set foot on Sark, Hugo was already celebrating the beauty of this pretty piece of countryside set in the sea. In August 1852, having just landed in Jersey, the first stage of his Anglo-Norman exile, he wrote to the Belgian poet André van Asselt, 5 leagues out of the sea, there is a huge rock, an island called Sark. It is a sort of fairy castle, full of wonders. A gentleman called Loder or Loper had just bought it for £6,000. This is one of those occasions when poets envy millionaires, unquote. Hugo was right about the figure, but not about the gentleman, because in fact the buyer was a woman, Marie Collins. Allaire was his maiden name. She was the daughter of a privateer, John Allaire, who had gathered quite a lot of money. So Marie Collins ruled Sark only for a few times because she died. When Hugo was in Guernsey, the seigneur of Sark was William Collins, son of Mary Collins. I don't know if Hugo ever met him. Maybe you know that? No? As for myself, I met the seigneur of Sark. You know him? Michael Beaumont. I had a few talks with him when he had problem with the Barclay twins. You know the story, I guess. Yeah. And he was really devastated by this. Today, his son Christopher is in charge, and he seems to have big plans for Sark, since he tries to buy the Barclays property on the island. Let's hope that this new story won't change Sark too much, but we can't be afraid. I've been chasing Victor Hugo for 50 years, and I finally met him in Guernsey a few weeks ago. As you can see, I was in good company. Jean-Marc Ovas on the right, the biographer, and Antoine Gallimard in blue, which is head of a big publishing company in France. It was a Hugolian cruise. We sailed together from Paimpol to Guernsey, and for me the idea behind this cruise was to make a connection between the two, Gallimard and Jean-Marc, so that the last and third volumes of the Jean-Marc's biography of Hugo could be published by Antoine Gallimard. I don't know if we succeeded. We'll see. Anyway, it was late at night. We were just out of a pub, as you can see by our faces. Anyway, everything seems to go the right way between the two guys, and so let's hope Jean-Marc will finish his work. Thank you very much.